United States is under nuclear attack. Take cover immediately in your carrier fallout shelter. Repeat, the United States is under nuclear attack.
America's Cold War years were filled with fear. Daily radio and newspaper reports blared frightening stories of advancing communism, imminent nuclear war, and Soviet spies. America responded with an all-out offensive against communist infiltration.
The growing menace of communism arouses the House of Representatives Un-American Activities Committee. Among the well-informed witnesses testifying is J. Edgar Hoover, head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Hoover speaks with authority on the subject.
Communism in reality is not a political party. It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
While Hoover's FBI worked behind the scenes, Congress expanded its own high-profile investigations, often ignoring the civil rights of the accused.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I believe I have the right to be confronted with any evidence which supports this question. I should like to see what you have.
Oh, well, you would.
Yes.
Beginning in 1947, the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, investigated communist influence in Hollywood. The committee was concerned with the power of movies to persuade audiences with subversive messages. With movie stars and other industry professionals called to testify, the hearings became red carpet events. For the anti-communist witch hunt, it was a publicity bonanza.
It is completely against the un-American feeling, this communistic thing. I believe I would move to the state of Texas if it ever came here, because I think the Texans would kill them on sight.
We have sold them some films a good many years ago. They bought the Three Little Pigs and used it through Russia.
If I had my way about it, they'd all be sent back to Russia or some other unpleasant place.
Most witnesses cooperated with the committee. However, a small group who became known as the Hollywood 10 refused to answer questions, citing protection under the First Amendment. Among them, screenwriter John Howard Lawson.
The question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
I'm framing my answer in the only way in which any American citizen can frame his
then
answer
you denied,
to a question
then
which
you,
invades his, absolutely invades
then
his
you
right.
denied, you refused to answer that question. Is that correct?
I have told you that I will offer my beliefs, my affiliations, and everything else to the American public, and they will know where I stand, as they do from what I have written.
Stand away from the stand.
For Americanism for many years, and I
stand away from the stand.
For the Bill of Rights, which
stand away from the stand. Therefore, it is the unanimous opinion of this subcommittee. John Howard Lawson is in contempt of Congress.
The Hollywood 10 were convicted of contempt and sent to prison. Thousands of others were blacklisted by the studios, forcing many talented movie makers into exile and obscurity. Among the friendly witnesses who testified in 1947 was a B-movie actor named Ronald Reagan. No one could have suspected that 4 decades later, Reagan would play a leading role in bringing the Cold War to an end.
If communists have attempted to inject their propaganda into the motion picture, they have failed miserably.
Perhaps Hollywood wasn't influenced by communists, but it was affected by the hearings. Movie studios added to the hysteria by cranking out such anti-communist films as Is This Tomorrow?, Red Planet Mars, and dozens of others. But tawdry films did little to distract President Truman from what he saw as a perversion of American democracy.
Now I'm going to tell you how we're not going to fight communism. We're not going to transform our fine FBI into a Gestapo secret police. We're not going to try to control what our people read and say and think. We're not going to turn the United States into a right-wing totalitarian country in order to deal with a left-wing totalitarian threat. In short, we're not going to end democracy. We're going to keep the Bill of Rights on the books.
Against the president's objections, Congress passed more dubious legislation, including the Internal Security Bill of 1950, which empowered the government to take action against anyone it deemed a security risk. Truman called it the greatest danger to freedom of speech, press, and assembly since the Alien and Sedition Laws of 1798. In 1948, the Red Hunt struck at the very center of government when ex-communist Whittaker Chambers accused a former State Department employee named Alger Hiss of spying for the Soviet Union.
I first knew him as Crosley. What his name is today, I am not prepared to testify to, or what other names he may have had.
Mr. Hiss represents the concealed enemy against which we are all fighting, and I am fighting.
The House committee was prepared to dismiss the case for lack of conclusive evidence, but one of its members pressed the issue, an ambitious young congressman from California, Richard Nixon.
These documents were fed out of the State Department over 10 years ago by communists who were employees of that department and who were interested in seeing if these documents were sent to the Soviet Union, where the interests of the Soviet Union happened to be in conflict with those of the United States.
Alger Hiss was convicted, not of treason, but of perjury, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His supporters said he was a victim of the communist hysteria. Others saw him as part of a communist conspiracy to destroy the United States and press the search for more traitors. Within months, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were arrested in connection with a plot to pass U.S. bomb secrets to the Soviets. The Rosenbergs denied the charges and claimed they were being persecuted as Jews and for their left-wing views. The evidence suggested they played a small but material role in the spy ring. The Rosenbergs were convicted and sentenced to die in the electric chair. Protests erupted amid claims of anti-Semitism. The Nobel Prize-winning writer Jean-Paul Sartre condemned the sentence as a legal lynching which smears with blood a whole nation. He warned,
"Your country is sick with fear. You are afraid of the shadow of your own bomb."
Despite the outcry, the Rosenbergs were executed in 1953.
Union Square in New York was the backdrop for these scenes of red violence. From their ranks will come the saboteurs, spies, and subversives should World War III be forced upon America.
At the height of the anti-communist hysteria, the real danger to America came not from the Reds, but from the so-called Red Baiters.
Even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
Of all the demagogues who exploited the Red Scare for political gain, no one matched the senator from Wisconsin, whose namesake, McCarthyism, would come to define the entire era of political persecution. Senator Joseph McCarthy emerged from virtual obscurity in 1950 when he claimed he had a list of 205 communists working in the State Department. The claim was patently untrue, but it launched McCarthy on a political juggernaut. For 4 years, the senator ran roughshod over civil liberties, while the news media served as a conduit for his reckless, unsubstantiated charges.
He had been a member of the party that he had recommended.
McCarthy's audacity knew no bounds. He accused Secretary of State George Marshall, the architect of the Marshall Plan, of infamy so black as to dwarf any previous venture in the history of man. He threatened President Truman and suggested the Democratic Party was a bedfellow of international communism. The hysteria of McCarthyism seeped into every aspect of American life. People rushed to condemn friends, neighbors, and co-workers. Many were fired or shunned for perceived left-leanings. Though McCarthy wore a cloak of patriotism, his abusive actions had a chilling effect on democracy. He was told,
"You have created an atmosphere so vile that people have lost confidence in their government."
But slowly, the tide began to turn. Dissenters spoke out.
McCarthy to wear new case of known red in Army.
The respected journalist Edward R. Murrow attacked McCarthy's repugnant tactics on his investigative TV series, See It Now.
1 month ago tonight, we presented a report on Senator Joseph R. McCarthy. We labeled it as controversial.
McCarthy remained characteristically defiant.
If I am giving comfort to our enemies, I ought not to be in the Senate. If, on the other hand, Mr. Murrow is giving comfort to our enemies, he ought not to be brought into the homes of millions of Americans by the Columbia Broadcasting System.
With his support withering, McCarthy pitted himself against the U.S. Army in an investigation of charges and countercharges concerning clout, favoritism, and communist cover-ups.
Unless we make sure that there is no infiltration of our government, then just as certain as you sit there, you will see a red world.
The ensuing Army McCarthy hearings tore away the senator's mask of self-righteousness and struck a fatal blow to his crusade.
Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness.
The hearings were a media circus, and in the end, inconclusive. But for the tens of millions of viewers who tuned in to watch, McCarthy was revealed to be an arrogant, blustering tyrant.
The American people have had a look at you for 6 weeks. You're not fooling anyone either.
The American public had seen enough. Nearly overnight, McCarthy's immense national popularity evaporated. President Eisenhower probably spoke for millions of Americans when he said,
"It's no longer McCarthyism, it's McCarthyism."
3 years later, Joseph McCarthy died, probably of complications from alcoholism. He was 48 years old. McCarthy faded, but an unsettling question remained. Could America win the Cold War without sacrificing the very liberties it was fighting to safeguard? Ominously, a highly classified government report concluded, "It is now clear we are facing an implacable enemy whose avowed objective is world domination. There are no rules in such a game. Hitherto acceptable norms of human conduct do not apply." A new and frightening day was dawning, one in which legal and moral restraints were set aside in a high-stakes game of diplomatic maneuvering, clandestine operations, and nuclear brinksmanship.